Welcome to the Vancouver True Crime Podcast series. This is a new series called the Tainted Love podcast series. So almost each and every day, I probably get at least one message. It's mostly going to be from a woman who's in a domestic type of violent type of situation. Sometimes it's been a series of violent sexual assaults that she experienced. Sometimes it's emotional abuse or just violence. Sometimes it's a blackmail, revenge porn type of situations. I'm dealing with probably about 3 or 4 of those right now. And when I built this platform 2 years ago, I wanted this to be a community-based platform that has some type of resources and the ability to advocate and help people in bad, terrible situations and to my best of my abilities with the resources I have. In this time of 2 years, I put together quite an amazing network of lawyers, law enforcement, medical personnel, even jail guards, people that work in the courthouse. So I'm getting a good understanding how the behind the scenes mechanics of the system works, the inside view. And for a lot of people, when they are a victim of a crime, it is very devastating. Their life is put on hold. They're usually having to deal with a lot of things all at once. The embarrassment, the shame of what they're dealing with, the humiliation, and then not to mention trying to get some type of legal recourse that can be a very difficult system to navigate, especially for someone first time or does not have a lot of resource. And in some of these cases too, of course, so if someone comes to me through my platform and says they've been a victim of a crime, the first thing I tell them is please make a police report. Get something in writing. And sometimes most of them do. And then if they get a police report and there is charges filed, I will report on it. I will make my platform available in those circumstances. And in the 2 years that I've been doing this, I've done this many times. And for the people who are listening, the main platform that I use to communicate with my audience, but it's not my only platform, but it's a main platform, is my Instagram page, Vancouver True Crime. Well, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. I have private message groups with large groups of community watch people. I have multiple different networks that are private behind the scenes. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And I built an amazing network of some very talented people, going from lawyers, medical staff, nurses, doctors. And as I reveal and as I continue on with this series, they will become guests on this podcast because I want to look at this from multiple angles. Because in my life, my most devastating stuff, the most stuff that was hardest to overcome, the most damaging, was probably someone who was close to me that I was in a relationship with. And there's a variety of reasons of why relationships break down, and I'm not saying I'm at no fault. But it doesn't help matters when you're dealing with someone who is vicious, toxic, and out to get you. And I've been dealing with stuff like this for a very long time in my life. I've always had very complex jobs that had a lot at stake. I have a background in corporate sales. I've handled, multi-million dollars of business transactions in a year time. And I've dealt with some very difficult people in my life, extremely difficult. I've always had to overcome things. I've always had a life of challenge And I'm not saying this to make you feel sorry for me. It's my character. I had a spinal injury that took me 2 years to heal from. I thought I would never walk normally again. Not only did I heal myself, but then within 2 years, I'm back in the gym doing 500-pound squats. I've always faced challenges head on. And when something presents itself to me as a challenge, all it does is just gets my attention, gets me hungry. I've been in I worked in a lot of high-tech startups, and a lot of high-tech startups can become quite toxic. And a typical scenario that I'm going to describe, and I'm sorry if I sound like a little all over the place here, but this series is going to look at toxic relationships from a whole variety of spectrums, because in my opinion, this is going to be the number one thing in your life that you're going to have to overcome, because there's no handbook about how to deal with like a super toxic boss or a coworker, or maybe a relationship. Everything is going good and out of nowhere they just go sideways on you. There's no handbook of dealing with that. But this is something I've been dealing with for a long time. So in a lot of my cases where I've worked in, like say in a high-tech startup industry, is that someone invents, in a lot of these cases, a new software. And it gets some traction. Maybe they are able to get a big client right out of the box. So once they're able to get a decent-sized client, they're able to get funding, investors, venture capital, and so on. So in a lot of the cases that I'm walking into a situation that has $3 or $4 million worth of venture capital funding. Everything looks good on paper, amazing resumes, PhDs, mathematicians, engineers, people have real pedigree degrees. So on paper, this should not fail. This should just be a slam dunk. The brain power, the cash, and the team all combined for a single goal. But unfortunately, it doesn't work out like that way. Agendas start. People start fighting over the resources of the money, different directions, and so on. And then I've literally been in situations where the company's divided. One team wants this way, the other team wants that way. Infighting starts, and it just gets uglier and uglier and uglier until the thing crashes and burns. The biggest example I've saw with this, and the company I'm not going to name, but in this scenario, the company raised over $20 million of investors' money and no sales, but an amazing, interesting product that had a great concept, especially for the time. The company was supposed to be $1 billion company. Our chief technical officer was former from Goldman Sachs. We had a mathematician from Oxford University, real star power resume. But changes of direction, fighting about the changes of direction, people taking it personal, people getting fired, people mad that person got fired, more and more infighting until that $20 million has been thrown into a fireplace and burned because the company didn't do anything. But then everyone who invested, put their time and energy, is left devastated. And I know I'm talking about a business relationship, but what I'm saying is that these are like microcosms for other scenarios. So imagine this, let's say in a marriage, for example, is that you decide to get married. Why do people get married? Because, a lot of people want to have children. They want to have a family life. They want to have stability. But then one of the partners decides that maybe I don't really want to be truthful with the other partner. Maybe I don't want the other thing, but I'm too cowardly to be open about it. Or maybe they are open about it. Maybe they want to push the marriage into a different direction. I've known, God, more than I can count. And this is not just a man. Everyone wants to say men are pigs. But I've seen in a lot of situations where the wife wants to start swinging or having affairs, and the other person doesn't. So maybe they might go along with it just to appease the wife or the husband, but it's awful for them. It's humiliating. But the other partner thinks it's awesome. This is all they ever wanted. And I've seen so many situations where one of the partner's selfish wants just completely destroys and overrides what the other person wants. Now, some people look at, their partner almost like an extension of them. And that can be good. But if that person kind of has more darker and more sinister ideas, and then that other partner that's an extension of them just almost becomes an outlet for whatever their wants and desires are. And that usually has long-term emotional and devastating things for the partner. Now we get into the realms of like personality disorders and, narcissism is thrown around a lot. And I think the term is quite overused quite a bit, but I think it is a good umbrella term that kind of fits all these kind of dark and defective personality disorders under one umbrella from a layman point of view. I don't have any background in actual psychology, but I've read lots and lots and lots of books on mental health and mental illness for a variety of reasons, usually because I was in a relationship where I'm trying to understand the behavior of the other person. The other thing that I really want to touch in this episode and really want to break down a lot is dating. Dating can be devastating. And when you meet a person, and this goes for men too, when you meet a person that you don't know, there's an element of the unknown. Of course, we try to use discernment and we have our standards, and hopefully we do. But there's always an element of danger when you're meeting people for the first time. We don't know really much about them. And sometimes things don't reveal themselves right away. Sometimes it takes time for it to reveal itself. People are good at being wolves in sheep's clothing. Some people can play a long game. I've seen both, and I experienced both. Sometimes people, they have an agenda, but they don't share it with you. So I want to really look into these types of scenarios. And I am going to talk a lot about online dating, safety, and hopefully, things for you to consider if you are consider online dating or you are consider getting in a new relationship. Because for both men and women, there's things that, you should consider if you want to keep yourself safe. And I'm not just talking safe like from their physical safety. I'm talking their emotional safety too. You say you're a dude and you really like a girl, right? You're really head over heels for her. So you decide that, that's who you want. But you go on a few dates and you find out, she's seeing a whole bunch of other people, but haven't told you, and you find out the wrong way. Now you're heartbroken, right? So, but there was probably signs. There's probably things he could have asked. The other thing I want to talk about too, and this bothers me because I hear it a lot. I hear it all the time because people approach me. I probably, on any given week, I probably talk about five to six, maybe sometimes 7 people who are in some type of situation that some type of harm came to them. And most of the cases it did, in most of the cases, alcohol is a factor. And I hear stuff like this. And again, I'm a big, when you're drinking around people you don't really know, and sometimes even people that you do know, right? As a rule, you should not let people handle your drinks unless you really trust them. Because I hear this scenario a lot where a person breaks down a situation. They talk about, there was alcohol involved, and they just say, the person just kept pouring me drinks and pouring me drinks and pouring me drinks. And next thing you know, they passed out or they got sick or they're in some kind of, effed up sexual situation that they wouldn't have done cold stone sober, right? And so that touches on a whole bunch of consensual consent. What is consent? What is consensual sex? We're going to look into that. I'm going to interview legal experts that are going to really break that down. right? You're in a situation, let's say you're with a partner and they want a certain type of sex that you're not really interested in. So what they do is they just keep basically pouring alcohol down your throat until you're basically almost passed out, and then do some type of sex act on you, not with you, on you, right? So there you go. Right? But we'll get more into that, because I hear this is a common thing I hear a lot about. And it really concerns me, because then the person doesn't even realize it. They almost feel that they are also at fault because they drank the alcohol, if that makes sense. So let's say this. I'm drunk. You're at that stage where you're intoxicated and someone's, here's a shot, where you're almost like, I've been in that situation where you're drunk, and then you're so drunk that you don't really have control about how much you're drinking anymore because you're impaired. And then they use that impaired state against you to try to facilitate something. So I really want to get some very clear legal understanding of what is the real legal definition of consent. If someone's drunk past a point, legally, is that consent? It's like, for example, if I get so drunk and I passed out and, someone has their way with me, right? I didn't give consent, I'm passed out. But what if I'm just kind of groaning, So how drunk do you have to be, or how sober do you have to be? So these are shades of gray, right? These are not easy answers. But these are situations that you're probably going to find yourself into. Or maybe this, right? We're going to get even darker. Kidnapping, human trafficking. Human trafficking is actually on the rise. And the most common way a girl now gets human trafficked, it's very scary, it's very frightening, is it's usually through what I call the romance scams. And that's another avenue to go down. So typically romance scams can happen for a couple of reasons. One, for financial reasons. There's all these catfish and frauds, and you hear about that, and these old widows that get duped by some catfish who's, has some magnificent profile, and the person's bullshit, and this woman's sending him money, right? You hear about that one. So there's that. That's a romance scam. Or some guy just appearing that he's something that he's not. Like there was a situation where a lady contacted me that her family and friends had been scammed by this contractor. Mr. Contractor has all this money, blah, 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 but all his money's out and he needs a quick check just to kind of, keep them afloat. And next thing you know, they're gone with the money. I'm making things very simplistic, and I'm paraphrasing. But back to the human trafficking. The most common way of human trafficking that I've been hearing about over and over again is a girl. She goes online, meets a cute boy. The cute boy gets in a relationship with her. She likes him. He's nice. He's charming. He's handsome. He buys her presents, shows her a good time, maybe spends a little cash on her. And then one day he's like, hey, would you like to go on a holiday? Now, if the girl's underage, maybe he'll say, "Oh, keep it a secret. Maybe you can come and see me, and I'll fly you out, or we'll fly somewhere together." Well, that girl goes on a plane, and she's never seen again. So you can get the idea. That's obviously the worst case scenario. Imagine your daughter meeting some scumbag on the internet. And next thing you know, she secretly gets a plane ticket, and don't tell your dad, don't tell your mom. Well, kids are rebellious. I did stupid stuff when I was a teenager. I didn't understand safety and stuff. But I think the most important thing that I want to get out of this podcast series of this one is give people understanding and definition of terms. When I was in business, and it was important that me and my potential client had the same understanding of what terminologies meant. So, for example, I worked for IBM, for example, and I was tasked to sell large, complex software to massive organizations, like we're talking cities, counties, ports, oil companies, complex facilities that have massive amounts of people, including hospitals, school districts, and so on. My job was to contact the HR department and try to get them to buy the IBM software that will make their job easier. Onboarding executives. Sorry, I got a siren in the background. It's true crime. It's going to give it some ambiance. And so it was important for me to speak a language to the HR department that they understood. So we had what's called definitions of terms. And I always made sure that they understood what I meant by a certain terminology that they meant. Because in different worlds, engineering, IT, business, HR, people use different terminologies for different things. They might say the word one way, but they mean this way. And then if I hear that word, I think it's this way. So it's important for me to have a definition of terms. So when I'm using a word, they understand what I mean when I say it. So when I was doing this project and contacting HR departments for, again, very massive organizations, one of the projects I did was how to get executives onboarded faster. So if you hire an executive and say you're paying them like $20,000 or $30,000 a month, sometimes it will take them 2 or 3 months to get them fully up and running, which is, you times that by 3, so you're almost out close to $100K in revenue of unproductibility. So it was important for me for them to understand that I had something that could help them become more efficient. So my words that I used was very important, and for them to understand me was important. So this is what I hope to get out of this series, is come up with definitions of terms that a lot of people are most likely going to find themselves in. What is the legal terminology of that? And then the shades of gray, right? So let's say this. What's the difference between, let's say, a woman that gets sexually assaulted by a stranger? Some creepy dude grabs her, throws her in a van. Obviously, there's nothing consensual about that. The law is pretty black and white about that. Okay, then the next scenario. What happened to my late wife? A very violent date rape. So I made a podcast about that. And if you haven't heard this, I wanted to share what my life was like with my late wife, who suffered from a very debilitating stroke that did damage to her frontal lobe, her executive function of her brain, and then it had a real breakdown of her personality. And unfortunately, her behavior became quite toxic. One of the factors that led to her breakdown of her mental health was a violent sexual assault that she experienced. And in the first year of our relationship, we spent a lot of time talking and dealing with it. So we had a great relationship for almost more than a decade, until the end when she had the stroke and started to break down. And her thinking about the sexual assault was very devastating, because she never felt she got justice, and she didn't. If you want to learn more about that, please, go look at the podcast about my wife. But in a short paraphrase, she met a guy online. The guy seemed okay at first, and he went on a few dates, and nothing really bad happened. They even slept together a couple times. It was pretty normal, and nothing terrible happened. And then he had this, would you like to do some role playing? And he had this horrible scenario. And because he set it up in such a way, it made her look like she consented to all of it. Of course, she didn't know that she was going to get dates. She thought, she was going to do something kinky with her boyfriend. So my point is that the consensual is very fuzzy, and even in the legal system, right? So then, again, her situation would probably most be classified as a date rape. So what if you are in a relationship, even a long-term relationship, 10, 20, 30 years, and maybe there was times you think back where, your partner gave you a ton of alcohol, and every time that happened, there's some bizarre defining definitions. But the most common scenario that I get probably on a daily basis is, because again, I reach a lot of people. My accounts, I probably reach this on Instagram on an average week, about 100,000 accounts. When stories are really popular and busy, it gets even bigger, and plus all the other platforms. So I do get a person almost every single day reaching out to me. And the most common scenario is they're in a situation, it's usually a dating type of situation. Again, alcohol's involved, and maybe the guy doesn't take no for an answer, because most of the times these are women, but the woman never filed a police report. Some time has went by and she feels kind of embarrassed, or maybe she did contact the police and it didn't go well. And in a lot of these cases too, the family of the predator are enablers. And there's one scenario that this was kind of early on in my platform. There was a bunch of very vicious rapes going on in Abbotsford. I'm not going to get too much in the details of this case, but it did take place in Abbotsford at a prominent restaurant chain. And a lot of women reached out to me, lots. It was the first time where I just got almost an overwhelming of all these women contacting me, and all telling a similar story. Lots of booze, maybe drugs, and then a violent sexual assault. And then the person's family is, they have a background that provides them some, legal privileges is the way I say it. So nothing ever happened. Nothing came of it. And I wanted to post about it, but because when I saw that no charges were filed, that there was an active police report, it went nowhere. And also knowing that this family had means, legal means and money, I knew the second I posted about it, I'd be sued for libel slander, even though the person's was a rapist piece of shit. So that's the problem. So this is why I'm motivated to do this podcast series, because I've been seeing this way too many times. I've seen it in my personal life, in my relationships, by people I love and care about being the victims of predators. And predators come in many forms. Not all predators are just like the cross-eyed, deviant hiding behind. Almost, it seems like in the majority of my relationships with people I care and love, they were a victim of a predator, and of many different spectrums. Right, my last wife that guy was a serial rapist. I looked him up. I know who he is. I tracked him. His name came up on a bunch of bad date lists, and he was raping prostitutes at knife point. Same car, same description, same MO, and I don't know if he ever went to jail or got caught. One day, when I have the times and means, I will hire some private investigators and find out everything I can about him, because never stop thinking about him. So you can see why this is a personal subject to me. And, I feel that a lot of people that are good people have been the victim of people who are not so good. And maybe they didn't have the self-confidence or didn't have the resources. But this is what this platform's for, to gather the resources, to create an understanding of right and wrong, and hopefully have the resources if people, usually through my platforms, people send me direct messages. Some of them are nice, some of them are trolls, some of them are cool. I talk to a lot of people every day, a lot of different kind of people. Talk to lawyers, I talk to law enforcement, I talk to current gangsters, I talk to former gangsters, I talk to tough guys, bikers, blue-collar guys, white-collar guys, artists. There's one thing that everyone universally despises, and that is a sex offender. Sex offenders get a hard time in prison for obvious reasons because they're disgusting, they're scum, they're trash. And it actually does bother me that they get protective custody. When I was a kid, I knew Terry Driver. I went to school with him. I went to school with his younger brother. My brother played hockey with his middle brother. I think Terry was the oldest. Terry was the Abbotsford murder rapist. And, real piece of shit. Obviously, the worst of the worst. Now, I grew up in Vancouver all my life. I'm a fourth generation, and I grew up in East Vancouver. So I know a lot of legitimate tough guys, and I know a lot of people who've been and who are in jail. And one of my friends went to jail for armored car robbery, did 10 years. So I asked him, what happens to sex offenders when you're in prison? He says, yeah, they go into protective custody. We can't really get at them, but we can get them. And I said, well, how do you get them? He looks at me and goes, who makes the food in prison? The inmates. They know what food is going where. And he told me a story. He said when Terry Driver came in, every day the guy was sick to his stomach because every time he ate the food, he started throwing up because they'd messed with his food. So what that meant is that he would have to go to the commissary, that's the prison store, and buy all his food and keep it in his cell. So basically he's living on tuna, cup of soups, and crackers, right? And sure, it's not the perfect punishment, but it's something. It just shows you how much people hate these disgusting people. And the reason why people hate them is because of the damage they do. Because if you're a man, if you're a brother, if you're a husband, if you're a mother, if you're an aunt, a grandma, and know someone who was mentally, verbally, sexually abused by a predator, you know what the damage is after them. When a sex offender gets their fingers in them and gets in their heads and stuff. And a lot of these people can play a real head game and make the person think that they're responsible for their abuse. Right? So that's a whole nother story. But the point is that these people are hated. And when it comes out that they did some kind of deviant sexual crime to somebody else, the whole community hates them. They're everyone they work with, everyone that they're associating will shun them. Who wants to be friends with a sex offender? Right? And like, again, the sex offenses come in a variety of forms. Could be a serial rapist like Paul Bernardo. Could be someone who likes to use liquor and do deviant stuff and maybe take pictures and films of it and hold it over their head afterwards, which is so fucking illegal. And I'm dealing with about 4 of these types of cases right now. And trust me, I got people on it. But when it comes out that this person, they're ruined. So I don't get it. I don't get it. Right? I don't get why people do it in the first place, but I don't get the mentality. I don't get the mentality that thinking that someone that what I don't get is someone putting it in their head it's okay to do to someone else. Because if you said to that same person, if someone did that to your mother or your sister or any female that you cared about, they would say, oh no, I wouldn't want that to happen. But then they go out and do it themselves. So anyways, I digress. So I'm going to tell a story about a very bizarre situation. Like I said, I was going to use a story from my Vancouver Beautiful is Ugly series, but perfect for this situation. So one of the things I want to talk a lot about is dating, right? And back in the day, when I was young and single, I went to the bar a lot. I worked in bars and da-da-da-da. You heard me say it all the times before. So one day, a friend of mine who was a DJ, he said, I am going to be at the Biltmore. The Biltmore is on Main Street, Main and Broadway. It's kind of a little bit of a bigger hotel. I think now it's social housing. And then underneath it, There was a liquor store, and then there was a pub, and there was a sports bar on kind of the main street level, but then there was a kind of bit of a dive bar in the basement. So my friend was doing a DJ set in the basement. So I get to the bar. It's moderately busy. Not really busy, but moderately, right? The crowd's a little rough, it was a bit of a dive bar. And pretty rowdy, lots of people drinking, heavy, hooping, hollering. It was a Saturday night. People are having fun. It wasn't a bad atmosphere. It was actually a pretty, lighthearted atmosphere, no tension in the air. And I look over, and there is a absolute bombshell woman. She looks like a movie star. She looks kind of like a young Marilyn Monroe. Beautiful face, blonde hair, curvy, tall, and she's wearing a black catsuit that really accentuates her hips and bum and legs and boobs. And she was quite striking, and especially in that environment. In that environment, it was like she just jumped out. And she walks right over to me, and I'm like, whoa, am I wearing the good cologne today or what? I didn't even expect her to go straight beeline right for me. And she's talking to me, and she's nice, she's friendly, she's laughing at my jokes. At this stage of my life, I've already traveled from Victoria, BC, all the way across to Halifax, working in a lot of bars and nightclubs across Canada. And this woman was possibly one of the best looking, on paper or photograph, women I've ever seen. And she just seems to have laser focus on me. And I'm not saying I'm not a bad looking guy. I'm not saying I don't think that, I can't pick up an attractive woman or blah, blah, blah. But it just seemed a little bit too easy. And I'm starting to get alarm bells, man. I'm starting to whoa, she's just so into me. She keeps telling me, hey, I got an apartment just around the corner. We can go hang out there. And you know what? If I was probably, let's say, about 10 beers in, I probably would have went. But I was relatively sober, and just something that seems to be too good to be true. So my first thought was, oh, I bet she has some crazy thug boyfriend, and I go to the apartment, I get stripped naked. Next thing you know, some big dude comes out, beats the shit out of me, robs me. So I thought maybe it was a scenario like that. So I'm backing down. I'm like, oh no, I gotta go get up early tomorrow. I'm making an excuse, and she's just hard selling me, and to the point where it's getting she's almost now becoming desperate. So then that's whoa, gorgeous women don't be desperate to pick up dudes. Usually, I've never seen it before, and like I said, I probably had a few hundred different nightclubs under my belt at this. I've never seen a situation like this. Drop dead, 10 out of 10, gorgeous woman, perfect body, perfect face. And she just wants to take me home more than anything in the world. And I'm just getting this is, I don't know, something about them. I'm just getting now alarm bell. So I just tell her, I actually get sick of it. And say, listen, I got to go home. She's starting to actually disturb me because I'm actually thinking what I thought at that time, I was getting set up to be robbed. That's what I thought. I've heard about this before. This is a situation I've heard before. A attractive woman picks up some dude, and next thing you know, the guy's rolled and blah, 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 right? So it's not an uncommon thing. So that's what I thought the situation is. So I go home, and the next day, I talked to a friend of mine. His name was Jason. And I said, Jason, you go to that Biltmore all the time, because he lived near there. And that was kind of his local bar. I said, have you ever seen a blonde? And before I could even finish, he goes, oh, let me guess, the blonde in the catsuit. And I'm like, yeah, wow, yeah. Go, let me guess, she tried to pick you up? He goes, oh, yeah. She goes, she worked, and trust me, Jason would sleep with anything. I've traveled with this guy a few times. Trust me, he was not very discerning. So for Jason to turn down a 10 out of 10, blonde bombshell. It got my attention. And I said, oh, let me guess. You thought she was going to rob you too? He goes, oh, no, 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 no. He looked at me and goes, no, 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 no. She's not going to rob you. I heard about her. I already know about her. And I said, well, what's up with her? I go, what's going on? What's the story? And he says, she's HIV positive. What she does, she had a scumbag boyfriend who liked to screw around. And apparently the guy was like, the guy was bisexual apparently, didn't tell her at all, kept it secret. He was going to bathhouses and group sex and, all this crazy stuff, not using protection, never got himself tested. And then eventually he got sick and he died. And then she didn't discover that he was like this until he was like almost dead, until it was like he was fatal, right? And then she found out he died of HIV. So she was positive. So what she was doing, that was her revenge. She would go to the bar and pick up dudes and do her best to give him HIV. So if nothing defies tainted love and toxic relationship, I think that encapsulates it perfectly, right? So a person, so imagine most guys that she did trick, they're thinking that they're picking up this most amazing bombshell. And maybe they even told their friends about it. Hey, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, they have a potentially fatal disease. And I know now with HIV, and there's like cocktails and they can dial it down and stuff. But you got to remember, this was like in the 90s when this happened. So HIV at that time was still a death sentence. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to my favorite podcast in Vancouver. I encourage you guys to listen to it. I've been on the show twice. And I'm going to be going back on a third time. I'm going to be discussing some current, personal stuff that's going on with me, and also a bizarre situation with a troll that I'm battling. Also, we'll be, from what I understand, we'll be talking about some missing person cases and stuff like that. I truly love the podcast. I love being a guest on it. They're a great crew. And that's the Maine and Hastings podcast. Great crew, love them all, and I'm excited about going back on that show. So hopefully I'll be back on July, but I want to give them a shout out. I really want my listeners to please, like their stuff, subscribe to their stuff, listen to stuff. In my opinion, it's one of the best podcasts in Vancouver. So there you go. And anyway, so this will be the episode 1 of the Tainted Love podcast series. And I know I'm probably all over the place, but I really wanted to give you my motivation, really what's in my heart and soul. I've been putting a lot of work into this platform for the last 2 years, and every single day, and I've been working really hard to build it up to be something kind of unique and something different, and with real advocacy for real people who need help. And that is the message, and that's the core of the mission of the Vancouver True Crime Podcast series, to spread awareness, provide entertainment, and hopefully some solutions. So again, I appreciate you guys listening, taking the time out. I appreciate all your support, the thousands and thousands and thousands of you supportive, positive people that have made it possible to do what I want to do. I thank you. I owe it all to you. And I'm forever humbled at your support, and I'm forever going to be in my gratitude. Thank you so much.